afternoon, everybody. This is Phil Gibson with People Care Health Services, and we welcome you to the Community Connections session today on home preparedness and shelter in place. Vanessa is going to be our speaker today, and she's from the Pueblo County Health Department. She actually covers about 5 counties down in the southern part of the state of Colorado, and we welcome her to our webinar event today. Thanks, Vanessa, for talking about this topic. I know it's during the winter, it can be a pretty busy time for you, I'm sure, even probably all year round, but we really appreciate the information.
Well, thank you, Phil. I really appreciate this opportunity to come and teach everyone. Like you said, I'm Vanessa Brazee. I am a South Region Emergency Preparedness and Response Generalist here at the Pueblo County Health Department. What that basically means is I handle health and medical aspects to all disasters in my region. I'm talking to you today about home preparedness and shelter in place, just because it's a very important topic that I don't think enough people speak about, and I really thank you, Phil, for inviting me to do this. Let's see.
You bet. Glad to have you.
So hopefully you can see what I'm seeing, but just if you don't walk away with anything else today, preparedness basically begins with you. During times of disasters, the more prepared individual households can be, the less there is a burden on the rest of the response. After a disaster, flood, whatever you can think of, blizzard, the responders are trying to stop whatever they can, what parts they can of the disaster if it was some sort of fire, or they're trying to help people that need the help the most, the people that are in danger of their lives, or maybe structures that are about ready to fall. The more you can do at your home and protect you and your loved ones, the better it is for the response. The more they can focus on what they need to do and not trying to help everyone else. So disasters. One of the things that make me giggle in this state is everybody says disasters do not happen in Colorado. I hear it all the time, and I'm not sure why, because we actually have a long list, and this is not even inclusive. There's other things I'm quite sure I forgot on here. But fire, utility disruption, that is a huge one. It's amazing how many people have power outages daily. Public health emergencies, I'll explain that a little bit more, but pandemic influenza, it's real and it could happen. Look at H1N1. Food contaminations, I'm not going to read the whole list, but a big one that we have here and a lot of people don't think about is I-25. I-25, I-70, those big interstate corridors, there's a lot of hazardous material that go up and down those. And all the train tracks, they're the same way. There's nuclear materials, there's caustics. There's actually, if you watch a train, every second car is something that would react violently to the third car up ahead. So these are just some that I've pulled up. And so health and medical, I work for the health department, so these are the things that I really focus on. And they're considered public health emergencies. A lot of people don't realize that public health is the lead agency on pandemics, epidemics, and mass casualty events. It's not something a lot of people think about, but there is a difference between epidemic and pandemic. I put them both up there. Epidemic is like when you have a flu go through a nursing home. It's an epidemic. It's a controlled group of people, a community. They're all affected, but it's not widespread. Pandemic is actually the world widespread health event. So H1N1 was a pandemic. And then mass casualty events can be anything from plane crashes to anything your brain can think of, where you have maybe mass fatalities or mass casualties. So I went through, and because I hear this often that most people don't think disasters happen in Colorado, I kind of pulled from a variety of them. This one is the Holly tornado that happened in March 2007. A lot of people say tornadoes can't happen in Colorado, but in history of the world, tornadoes can happen here. They may not be as destructive as the rest of the tornado alley, but we are at the beginning of it. Pardon me. This is the Colorado floods into 2013. They weren't exclusive to El Paso and Boulder counties, but they were the worst. They happened throughout the I-25 corridor. They caused many problems that a lot of people didn't foresee coming. They never thought that we could have a flood when we don't have a river here. Like I said, I work in Pueblo County, and actually we're infamous for we never have disasters down here. We're south. We're not Colorado Springs. We're not Denver. We're not Fort Collins. We're not the western slope. We don't really have disasters here. And then October 2016 happened. The Beulah fire started first. It was a type 2, which means that it was large enough to call in state assets to be able to put it out. It was a pretty large fire in the 15,000 range of acres burned. And it was the first fire in this area since most can remember. And to top that off, right after the Beulah fire, we had the Junkins fire. It was a fire that affected the same communities, just on the other side. So one burnt the western half, the other one burnt the eastern half. And they happened almost 2 weeks apart. So we went from having a massive type 2 disaster to the Junkins fire being even bigger. And it was a level, it was considered a type 1. We had to have federal assets to be able to put this fire out. The hailstorms of Colorado in 2013-2017, hail and wind are usually not considered when you think about disasters, but they can be just as dangerous as a blizzard event. In the recent storms, we saw huge flooding of basements. We saw buildings and cars being affected. And then in one of those pictures, you actually saw roads being closed because of feet of hail. So Beulah was the community that those two fires in 2016 kind of surrounded. And because of that, with every fire, you've seen that in the Waldo, the Hayman, all of those, that there's flooding after a fire. Fires are kind of the disasters that keep on giving. Once you have the fire, you have all of that surface area that no longer collects water, and then floods will always follow. And it's not an immediate thing. They can happen 4 or 5 years out. And then as the trees start falling, it even becomes more dangerous because you have dead trees floating in the water. So I bring all of this up, and what can you do at home? This is, preparedness is very much a lifestyle. And once you start being prepared, you have to keep it up. It's not one of those you can do it one time and you're done. Throughout this presentation, I'll be going over kits. They're called mini things, and I use many forms of the kit so that way you can get used to them. They're called preparedness kits, they're called go kits, but they're all essentially the same. And it's really important to have a kit. Now, why is a kit important? Why should I do it? When a disaster happens, the first 72 hours, you are expected to maintain. You're supposed to be able to take care of yourself. It doesn't matter if the power is out, if you can't leave the house, it's all important to you. So we call them 72-hour kits as well, because they have to have enough stuff for everybody in the building. So in a home or in the car or even at your work actually probably thinks about this. If you work in an office type or a building structure outside of your home. But it's basically what you need in 72 hours to be able to maintain. Now, if you're in danger, if your life is in danger, if you're having a medical emergency, there will be responders there to get you. If the floodwaters are rising and it's in your building, there will be rescues. This is if there was maybe like a blizzard or some sort of shelter-in event where you would have to stay in your home and not be able to leave. So there's many types of kits, the home, car, the work, and they're all very similar. We'll kind of go through each one so you can be able to see what may go into a kit. we have many suggestions, but just know that kits are very personal, and what I have in my kit may not match what you have in yours. So along with kits, and before we dive into kits, because that's the bulk of this, I wanted to go over emergency plans. It's important for you, your family, and whoever you're with, know what you're going to do in disasters. Now, I don't want you to plan for individuals. Okay, if a blizzard happens, I'm going to do A, B, and C. I want you to think just on a broader scale. Kind of do an all hazards approach. That's what we do in the upper echelons, and that's what we expect you guys to do. The first bullet says out-of-state contact. I'm going to share a personal story with this. I had an uncle in 9/11. He was working in the Pentagon at the time the airplane struck the building. He called his wife and said, "I'm A-okay, don't worry about me," and she didn't share it with anybody else. And then the phone lines went down. No one was able to get a hold of her or him, and nobody knew the status. It was a very tense 9 hours, and all the family kept calling each other, trying to figure out who knew what. Eventually, my aunt ended up reaching out to one family member, and we were all able to finally connect with that family member and find out that he was fine. He was actually helping with first response on the scene. He was actually being a responder. But it was a while before we found out. So for planning purposes, we all suggest that you find that one family point of contact. Out of state is preferable. So that way, if something happens in your state or in your neighborhood, if you have someone that's also being affected by the same disaster, they may not be the best point of contact. And it's someone that everybody in the family or everybody that needs to know can call and contact and find out your status. I know a lot of people are using Facebook now, and that's a good way. But there is people out there that don't have Facebook. So maybe you can have a Facebook contact. That will be the point of contact for everybody else. These are just things to think about. Meeting place other than your home. This is because, especially in fires, and since that's a major disaster we have here, more than we'd like, if something happened and we had to evacuate for a fire, having everybody meet back at your home may not be a great idea. Disasters never happen on the weekend when you're with your family. They usually happen while you are at work, your spouse is at work, and maybe your kids or someone else you live with is in other places. Everybody seems to always be apart and have to reunite. So try to pick a meeting place that's outside of your home, and then maybe also you can have your home as well, especially if you're having a blizzard. But just think of places that you would meet that's far away from your home and maybe in a different area. If you live in a heavily wooded area, is there someone that lives in town? Things to think about. Knowing where your utility shutoffs are. There's a lot of times where us on the upper will tell you, okay, we need you to shut off this. We need you to shut off this. The power is out, but it's surging. Please shut off the electricity to your home. These are probably not the shutoffs you should be finding in the dark with a flashlight while you're already frustrated. So just know where they are and know how to shut them off. And if you don't know that information, you can always contact your utility company and they might be able to show you. And the biggest thing is discuss your plan often. There's a lot of people out there that make wonderful plans, but if your entire household doesn't know that plan, they don't know how to do it. And practice. I know practice seems silly to evacuate your whole family out of the house and just make it a big game. Because honestly, in disasters, your brain, your cognitive thinking part of your brain shuts off. It goes to your caveman brain, is what we call it. It's the limbic system. And that brain falls back on whatever it practiced. That's how people that learned CPRs 10 years ago still retain it when they need it. That stress has pulled back all the layers of brain, took you back to your caveman, and will think of the last thing it remembers. It remembers practice really well and repetitiveness. And that's the reason why in a CPR class, you learn it and then you practice it. All right, shelter in place. This is one of those things that a lot of people are scared of. If you are not, thank you very much. But there's a lot of shelter in place where people are hesitant. You're in the middle of a disaster, and we're asking you to stay in your home. Now, in blizzards, a lot of people are for it. They don't want to go out in it. But say there's a bomb threat, and we asked you to stay in your home. A lot of people are like, I don't want to be anywhere near this. Why do I have to stay inside? There's a lot of reasons to have a shelter in place, and that could be a whole nother set of PowerPoints. But just know that there's people that are highly experts in every type of disaster. And if they call for a shelter in place, it's because you are much safer inside than you are outside. And just know that there's probably going to be a lot of information that is going to come with a shelter in place. How long, what requirements we have. Just know that just follow instructions and please stay inside. So every shelter in place will be different. It really depends on the disaster. I put a couple of the things that we might ask of you up here so they won't be foreign, but basically go inside immediately. As soon as you hear a shelter in place, it's time to head inside. And then it will tell you if it's a danger to your person. They might tell you to lock and close all your windows and exterior doors. It might be if there's a not so great person running around your neighborhood. There might be something that says shut off all your fans, shut off your heating, shut off AC. That might be if there's something in the air that might be harmful for you and your family. Could even be smoke from a fire. So just know that that might be something we ask for, and it's another reason why you should check your utilities and know how to shut off things. And then small interior room with no windows, that's usually a tornado order. So it really depends on what the disaster is to what you might do. So I've talked about a home kit, and I will get into that about exactly what you might put in your kit, but just know that wherever you go, your kit should go with you, because there's a possibility, especially in a small interior room for a tornado, you don't want to go outside of that room to get the supplies that you need. So if you're not sheltering in, the other portion that we might ask you to do is called evacuation. We see a lot of evacuations in fire, and it's something that's very familiar to everybody. I stole this picture from the Black Forest fire. You have the mandatory evacuation, which usually means that you have 10 minutes to get out of your house, and then the pre-evac. Pre-evacuation is a nicety. They are giving you plenty of time to pack everything you need. Something that I challenge you to do one day is pretend you have 10 minutes to get out of your house and see how well that actually works. I had an incident. I live in Colorado Springs, and I had a small grass fire coming towards my house. I got put on pre-evacuation. I am a proud owner of 2 kids, 3 dogs, 2 cats, and a rabbit. Trying to evacuate my house with everything that I needed was quite a test of wills. So try this. Think about how you would organize this. What needs to go? What needs to stay? How quickly can you throw all that things together? This is definitely some of those things that when you're evacuated, you may not be able to go back for a week or even longer, depending on the disaster. And what happens if you can never go back? The fire has burnt down your house. The flood has made it inhabitable. It's possible. So, and with every evacuation, it's really important to take that home kit with you. One good thing about evacuations is that if we are ordering for an evacuation, we are also ordering for sheltering. And if we're ordering for sheltering, we're thinking about food, we're talking about shelter, the things you need. But the things that we're not going to have is your medication. Medication is really hard to get. So make sure that your kit, which should have medication in it, goes with you. And then this is basically very similar to the other ones. Make sure that you have a meeting place, because disasters never happen when you're home. A lot of the people in the Waldo Canyon fire, in the Hayman fire, they were all on vacation. Could you imagine getting a notification on vacation that you can't go home and evacuate your stuff and your pets? There's a lot of people that had to call their neighbors and ask them to throw stuff into the car and make sure that Fido got out. So these are things to think about. Finally, the kit that I all promised you guys. So I'm just going to go over items, but remember, this kit is very much you. It may not be the same as mine. My kit has chocolate. Why? Because in 72 hours with no power and all of those pets and kids, I'm going to need something for me. So these are just things to think about. So water is very important. You need the things you'll need for 3 days. I want you to imagine that you have no power, you have no running water, you may not have any utilities, heat, just things to think about. They may not all happen at once, but you need to be prepared. Because remember, the more you're prepared, the better first responders can go out and help you. And they have to clear roads, they have to do a lot of things before they can start getting people out of their homes. So food and water supply, we ask for non-perishable foods. If you have no power, you also have no refrigerator or freezer. Or if you do, the food is only going to be good for 24 to 48 hours, depending on when the power actually went out. They say high protein foods because they make you feel fuller longer, and they are better for high stress situations. You're going to be burning a lot of carbohydrates and everything, trying to just deal with the disaster you're in. Water is complex. It's 1 gallon per person per day. Also, if you have pets, it's 1 gallon per pet per day. So you can start doing the math. There's a little bit more I'll get into a little bit later, but just have that rule of thumb. Stockpile, this is the best time to have your prescription meds, over-the-counter meds, first aid kits. With prescription meds, a lot of people are trying to figure out how to stockpile those. 90-day supplies. If you ask your pharmacist for a 90-day supply, they can usually get that through your insurance. Then I would put 30 days of that supply into your kit. The reason is because you're not going to use it right away. You have it. And then next time you get your 90-day supply, swap them out. Take out the old pills, put in the new. And then that way, at least you have 30 days supply of any medication that you need. Glasses, I wear glasses. Do you have an extra set? What happens if you're in a car accident and your glasses are broken and now you're in a shelter because it was a big earthquake event? Do you have an extra set? I couldn't live without my glasses, so I try to always make sure that they are, I have an extra set. So here's the complicated part about water. So you need 1 gallon per person per day for drinking and cooking, and 1 gallon per person per day for hygiene. So you can't clean in the same water you drink. So if you start doing the math, I have several dogs, several kids. I have a lot of water stored. Also, I know there's a lot of people out there that store water in old 2-liter bottles. Those are great, but they are open to becoming infected with other things like mold or things that would make you sick. So we suggest sealed, unbreakable containers that come with water in them. If you are going to store water in other containers, just make sure that they're very well cleaned and that you check them often. If they're clear, they should be good. If they start becoming cloudy or otherwise, toss the container and start over. You can also pull water from your hot water heater. You can fill up bathtubs if you have enough notice. Toilet tank, we're talking toilet tank, not the bowl. So the toilet tank water has not been contaminated yet, and I would use it for cleaning, maybe not drinking. And then just know, especially the health department, we might put out an order that says that it's a boil order or a bleach order. It means that you need to do something to your water because it's unsafe. So just make sure that you stay current with what's going on in the disaster and follow any instructions that are given to you just so you don't get sick. Food. So food is complex. I want you to imagine that you're in a house, you have no power, you have no refrigerator, and you also probably don't have utilities such as natural gas. So it depends on the disaster. Sometimes they keep the natural gas on. If the natural gas line has been severed in some way, they'll shut it off. So you need to make sure you have non-perishable food that maybe doesn't need refrigeration or maybe doesn't require any cooking. And then I know a lot of people out there are high tech now, and do you have a manual can opener? Because your can opener that's automatic does not work without power. Just things to think about. So Colorado, we have a wonderful thing here that a lot of people like to go camping or fishing. Think about your camping and fishing supplies. You could use them in the 72-hour. Do you have enough gas to run your cook stove or maybe your barbecue grill? There are great ways to cook as long as you can go outside. Please do not use these devices inside. They could make you sick. Just look around. There's a lot of preparedness items you already have. The important part is to put them all in one location. I do use my camp stuff as my preparedness kit, but it's with the rest of my preparedness kit. You don't want to, when you're stressed, you don't want to think about where that manual can opener is. Wow, where did I put that electronic, that warming blanket, just in case it gets cold. So these are other things that you can find in a kit. Radio and weather radio are super important. You want to stay as informed as you possibly can. So that way you know if you're going from pre-evac to evac. Say that you don't have power, it's very important to keep a radio on, and maybe a weather radio in times of flooding or blizzard, or sometimes we've had a mixture. We've had one community have a power outage that wasn't weather related, but it was out for 2 weeks and they had a winter storm coming. It's good to know that if you don't have power and you have a winter storm coming, if we have shelters, which we did, we had a warming shelter where they could go stay at night, and it's important to get that information. Flashlights are power outage. Whistle. A lot of people are like, why do I need a whistle? If you're in a tornado and your building reduced, or maybe people are having troubles finding search and rescue, whistle is the best way to get a signal to first responders that you're there. Whistles are very important, especially if you get lost in the woods. They're a great way to let someone know that you're there and you need help. Local maps are also something people look at me funny about. Think about this, the Holly tornado. There was actually problems with responders getting to certain locations because there was no street signs anymore. There was no structures that identified a house, or maybe if you always turn left at the Loaf and Jug on your way home and you don't really know that street name, if that Loaf and Jug's gone, would you bypass that street? It's sometimes good to have a reference of what the community layout is so you can be able to find your way around, or maybe help people find you. I know landlines are kind of a thing of the past, but it's always good to have a corded landline phone, even if you don't have services, because you can plug in and still call 911. Phones and internet are usually the first things that don't work in a disaster. Next is usually power. So just know that internet and phones are spectacular why we have them, but they're usually the first capability to go. Vital documents is birth certificates, any sort of document that you need to prove who you are, driver's license, things, if you're military, there's a DDD 214. There's a lot of important documents that you need to have. I keep mine in a fire safe so I could grab them really quickly, but you can also keep them in a Ziploc bag. So that way, no matter what happens, if you throw them in the car, they don't get wet, they don't get destroyed, things to think about. Extra batteries. You are trying to do all of this for 72 hours. Do you think the batteries you have are going to last that long? Most do, but sometimes you can get faulty batteries, old batteries. I actually take the batteries out of my devices and I store the batteries with them just so they don't corrode. That's just my personal thing. Okay, so now you are stuck in a house for 72 hours. You need to think of things to keep your mind occupied, because if you focus on what's going on outside the house, or maybe if you have kids like me, it's going to get pretty boring pretty quick. So these are some things to think about: books, toys, playing cards, something you can do that doesn't involve power. A lot of people use their cell phones to entertain their kids during things like this, but if you don't have a wall outlet to charge that cell phone, it's going to die very quickly. A lot of people use their cars, but eventually will run out of gas. So just things to think about. Bleach, we use bleach for purifying water. There is a ratio of bleach to water that you can drink. And if we have a bleach water, they're very rare, but if they happen, normal over-the-counter bleach works perfectly. And then some of the other things we've kind of already covered. Lantern, those are really wonderful for outside. Be very careful. They're a fire hazard inside. So these are unique family needs. And of course, my PowerPoint, there it goes. All right. So these are ideas for people with disabilities. Everybody that has a disability has their own, but dry erase boards, markers, they're to be able to either entertain those that maybe have Alzheimer's, or maybe communication if their communication devices aren't working because of power. There's some other things on there, and it really just depends on what type of disability that you have in your household or maybe at your work, and just kind of think of what they might need if power's not working. Power wheelchairs are usually a big problem. Someone is used to that power wheelchair and they don't have a manual one, so these are just things to think about. And then infants. I know there's a lot of moms out there that choose to breastfeed, which is wonderful. But if a disaster strikes and the kid, the infant is at a daycare or maybe with grandma and grandpa, is there extra formula and bottles somewhere? Is there extra diapers somewhere? These are all things that the infant will need. And so things to think about. And then I think we pretty much covered all of the medical records, medical supplies, oxygen. Just know if you're a diabetic, your insulin usually has to be refrigerated. You might consider thinking about a little tiny cooler and put it inside there to keep it as cool as you can. Refrigerators are usually pretty good for 24 hours if you never open the door. That's after that, all the food, medication, everything in there is considered contaminated and you have to toss it. So keeping it in a little tiny cooler, you'll be able to regulate the temperature just a little bit more. These are ideas for your car, very similar to the other ones. Now, if you are evacuated, you should take your home kit with you, but you should also have a car kit, because just because you have a home kit, you may not be able to get to it. If you're trying to return home during a blizzard or something where it'll prevent you from going home, you might still need a car kit. So these are a lot of examples. Shovel and sand are really for getting yourself out of trouble. Tow, rope, chain, these are all just ideas, and a lot of them you can find in commercial car kits. Those can be pretty spendy. I would just look around your house and try to build one from what you already have. And I think, yeah, that one's it. Pets. Just remember, something that I really suggest, because I've seen it, is when you evacuate your home, you're most likely going to have to put your pet into a pet shelter. There is a lot of regulations that say that people can't actually shelter with pets due to allergies and all sorts of things, unless it's a service animal that has a totally different set of rules. Your pet's shelter location should be pretty close to where you're sheltering, but not always. So something that I did is I took a picture of me with my pet. It's the best identification I can have to say that is my pet. It's in a picture with me. A lot of other people will take just pictures. They'll have ID tags. They'll have something about the pet that can identify them. But just remember, if it's a large-scale disaster like these hurricanes, it's going to be really hard to reunite you with your animal. So try to have as much identification for that pet as you can, or even knowing if you've chipped your pet, you have that ID number, because there's a lot of complications with that reuniting portion. Pet records might be important. They'll want to know if they're vaccinated, if they have to segregate them from other animals. Any pet medications, they're just like human medications. They're really hard to get because they don't know the dosing or the reasons. So try to make sure that you've stockpiled your pet medication as well. All right, so now you have all of this stuff. What do you do with it? Well, we suggest twice a year when you set your clocks, you should also check your preparedness kit. Things expire, batteries will die. There's a lot of things that are in the kit that are very time sensitive. So we always say that when it's daylight savings time, that's a perfect time to rummage through your kit, make sure all the food is still good. And if it's coming up to expiration, so if you check it in November and it expires in December, I always just pull it out and make that priority to eat it and then swap it with something that expires a little bit later. Just a good way to try to make sure that your preparedness kit keeps up. Storage containers. A lot of people think, oh my gosh, I have all this stuff, where am I going to put it? One of my favorite places to tell people to put them in is suitcases. You have these rolling suitcases that you only use during vacation, and you're not going to need your preparedness kit while you're in your vital documents need to stay somewhere that's easily taken out, but your food storage, you're not going to need those if you're on vacation. So it's a great place to put it in. And those things are meant for heavy weight and being able to move. So rolling suitcases are like the best preparedness storage items. You can also use plastic bins, boxes, suitcases, duffel bags, backpacks, whatever you have available. I would not tell you to go out and purchase a whole bunch of things to store this stuff in. I would look around your house, especially if you have purses. A lot of people have purses from far, far away. You can turn those into bags, especially if they're really big. Just look at what you have and think of the best way to move things. When you are evacuating, and from my experience, the faster you can organize things and put it into your car, the best. And I actually had troubles with large plastic bins that I had because they didn't fit well in my car. I ended up grabbing some grocery bags and putting things into grocery bags just so it fit better. So that concludes everything that's in a kit. Now, just remember that kits are very personal, and just think about what you could not live without for a 72-hour period. And think about putting it into the kit, or maybe duplicating. If you only have one of something, should you get another one and put it in the kit? Kits are very personal, and feel free to put whatever you need in there. I work for Pueblo County, and this is something really big that we're doing down here. So this is the emergency notification system. I won't read this whole slide to you. I'll let you read it. But this is essentially reverse 911. That's a coined statement, so we can't call it that anymore. So it's called the emergency notification system. Every county has it, and it is a voluntary system. They don't automatically, I shouldn't say all, most of them don't have the capability to do a reverse 911 unless you opt into it. So make sure you look at your county's websites. It's usually with sheriff or anyone that has a dispatch center, and see if there's a way for you to enroll in your emergency notification system. This is a way for them to get information to you, and it's personal. You can have it with landlines, cell phones, you can change it, you can put in your preferences, and this is the best way as emergency management to get a hold of you guys. Here in Pueblo and in several regions, they actually have what's called an Access and Functional Needs Registry. Due to HIPAA laws, I don't know the amount of people in my region that is on oxygen or maybe can't self-evacuate. This is a registry that my residents can put in that information and self-identify. If someone can get out of their house, but they can't lift a dog, or maybe they can't put their kits in their car, or maybe they would just have a big difficulty evacuating, they can self-report that. They can say, I'm at this location and these are where I'm going to need help. And that really helps me as an emergency responder because I know who to prioritize. or if you have oxygen and you need power to have that oxygen, if I can prioritize a certain location for power to come back on for that person, or maybe I can say, wow, I can't get power to that person, but I can evacuate them. I'll know the exact needs that that community has, and it really helps us figure out where we need to concentrate and how we can protect our communities. And then I'll let you read that. Sorry, I had that second one. So in the Pueblo County, this is kind of it. We have them on our sheriff's page, on the Pueblo County Sheriff's page. And these are the little icons we use. I know a lot of people are using icons like this, so I put them up there. I know everybody in here is from different parts of Colorado, so just reach out to your local emergency management office, maybe sheriff's office, and see who kind of houses these and make sure that you're on the list. All right, this is it. You can't control disasters, but you can control what you do during, before, and after. So preparedness is really up to you guys. And everyone out there, the better prepared you can be, the better I can serve you all. So these are my internet resources, Ready Colorado and ready.gov. Anything I've gone over today, they have it in triplicate. You can print off things, you can get ideas, they tell you how to build kits, they give you preparedness items to do every month. They're really good resources. And this is my information. That is my office number and my email address. If you think of something in the coming months and you want more information, you are more than welcome to reach out to me. And if you have any questions, I can help you now.
Wow, Vanessa, a lot of information there. Thanks for, I'm sure you probably have a lot more you could share, but that was a lot. And thanks for bringing that to our attention. That was wonderful. Hey, we do have a couple questions here. One is, when you receive an emergency notice, isn't it a good idea to fill bathtubs as well as sinks for water that can be purified?
Yes. Especially depending on which disaster you're in. If you are kind of getting a shelter in notice, filling bathtubs, sinks, kitchen sinks, any devices you have with water, pitchers, you feel free to fill up as much as you can, especially if you live in a rural area and maybe you're not going to be able to get services out to you very quickly. It's a good way to store water.
Okay. And then there was another question associated with, let me get back to that real quick here. It looks like it correlates to actual physical property. It says, from my experience, property landscaping is also an effective measure for emergency preparedness. Large trees and water runoff zones close to the house are important factors to keep in mind for emergency preparedness. Could you expand on that a little bit, just your thoughts or what your experience has been associated? Because I know, particularly in the mountainous regions, we have people that they're being asked to, clear sections of their property around their house and that kind of thing. What's been your experience?
We call it house mitigation. And yes, if you're in a fire heavy zone or maybe a flood zone, there's a lot of things that you can do to the exterior of your home. A lot of people here in Pueblo has actually a really high water table. So there's a lot of sump pumps in basements to help mitigate that problem. It's basically knowing what your risk factors are and being able to find professionals to come out and do that. I can't do the specifics on the tree mitigation. I want to say it's 20 feet in between trees, and then you have a certain amount of the tree you actually have to mitigate up. But there's professionals out there, and I know there's a lot of information. So if you know you're in a floodplain, if you know you're high risk for fires, even when you're landscaping, just having a slope to your yard so it pushes the water away from your house is super important. I know that there's subject matter experts in each part of that type of mitigation that you can reach out to. I know lots of fire departments have non-emergent lines that you're welcome to call and ask questions. Firefighters even come out and change the batteries in your smoke detectors, which is another way to mitigate your home for disasters. So it really kind of just depends on what disaster, what your risks are. And it's good to look at those things and kind of find what you might need.
Okay. No, that makes sense. Couple of questions. You know, when you started off, you mentioned you need to be able to kind of be able to. I don't think we called it shelter in, but you need to be able to kind of maintain yourself for 72 hours. How did they come up with that number? I was just curious as far as.
That is a national number.
Okay.
And what they did is they looked at a whole bunch of disasters of all different types. And they found out that 72 hours is kind of the mean. Like if you have a hurricane, you have all those downed trees. So it takes about 72 hours for all those trees to be mitigated and pulled aside so they can be able to get to you. Flood events, that's usually how long it takes to get enough boats. So they basically took a national average of all disasters, and they figured out that 72 hours in that time frame is about the time that first responders can get to you. Sometimes it's sooner and sometimes it's later, but for the most part, 72 hours is the safest number.
Okay. All right. And then, you know, some of the floods we've had around here and some of the stuff we saw in Houston, are you starting to hear, you know, in your field, are you starting to hear kind of wind about, you know, particularly with like flood events, are you starting to hear that they're re-looking at some of these areas that maybe once weren't considered floodplains, you know, might be reclassified, or what are you kind of hearing about some of that stuff?
Floodplains are classified due to soil composition and then usually the topography. A lot of those don't change. There's some floodplains that maybe people didn't know of. I know in the Broadmoor area, there's actually a big portion of the Broadmoor area that's actually in a floodplain. It wasn't well known, but it's been a floodplain since they started building there. It was just an area that maybe was forgotten about. There's new floodplains for sure after fires. When you have fires, there's two different burns. There's a clean burn and a dirty burn. And a clean burn means that every source of vegetation is completely gone. A dirty burn means that it jumped and it doesn't have that, there's still some vegetation. And when you have a clean burn, it actually causes water that would have been absorbed by the vegetation will actually go downhill. And it will just go to the lowest part and it will flood that area. So that's the reason why you see a lot of floods after fire, because it changes the landscape. So not that flood zones are really changed. They're not, once you have a flood area, it probably doesn't erase. You're probably always in a flood area. But if you have some natural disaster, that could cause you to become in a flood area. And it's usually just until the effects of that fire go away. And I know that the Hayden fire in 2004, they are still growing vegetation in those areas. So
Sure.
Cheeseman Canyon and everything else like that, they're still in flood danger, but not as bad as it was when the fire first hit. Because they do have aspens, they don't have they have ground cover, but they don't really have the big ponderosa pines anymore. Those take a while to grow. So it'll change with what happens. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
Well, no, yeah, and the reason I was thinking about that is, you know, after the floods up in Estes Park and Lyons and, you know, Larimer County, El Paso County, all that stuff. I know I'd heard that the Army Corps of Engineers up there had kind of reclassified some of that area because I think some of the thought was the way the river used to run, you know, maybe 100 years ago, and the way it runs today is based on some buildings, some other things, that the actual path of the river is probably what it's supposed to be today than what it was, 40, 50 years ago. So yeah, that's why I was curious.
Yeah, things like that happen. Corps of Engineers, they are definitely the subject matter expert on that one. And I do know that rivers are actually supposed to change course. Nowadays, because we build things next to them, we make them stay the way they are, but actually rivers are supposed to change course. So it's not unheard of for nature to change its mind.
Hey, how much of, with current world events that are happening, how much of that does that play into your shelter in place strategies, that are going on? I mean, possibility of some major, world event happening. Is that impacting your strategies a little bit, or are you thinking about things differently associated with shelter in place?
Problem with disasters is that there's a lot going on. You have the response and the recovery phase. I'm quite sure once they've done the recovery phase and things start calming down from Harvey, we'll probably see a lot of things come out from those disasters. It's usually a little bit farther in the future. I know we have a lot of lessons learned from Katrina and all of the very past kind of shelter in place. With every disaster, we learn more. You can plan and plan and plan, and then nature or terrorists give you a loop you weren't expecting. So I can tell you that we definitely, in my field, we constantly revisit the past and try to learn from it and try to guess what to do in the future. And it's a lot of lessons learned, and we do a lot of extensive learning on all of those. I myself have not seen any changes to the shelter in place in some time. For the most part, it's about the same.
This question is parlaying to, possible nuclear event. I think that's,
right.
One of those types of things. And that would be I think that's probably where that question's coming from. And so I'm wondering, is there, because I've heard that shelter in place is one of the strategies if there is some type of nuclear event out there that's in a close proximity where you live.
Nuclear events are hard. They are they're hard. In a certain amount of, so as responders, we look at a disaster in circles. We have the hot zone, and the hot zone is pretty much nothing you can do is gonna help you. And then there's the warm and the cold. And there's different strategies to which portion or proximity you are to the disaster. So where some people will actually shelter in place for a nuclear, there also might be an evacuation. That is a level of, there's a lot that goes into that, especially with any terrorist attack. And down here in Pueblo County, we have the national stockpile for blister agent. So we even have to factor that, and even that chemical has a different approach. For the most part, most of their education with what to do for those is based on trials, and most of the education we had during Cold War and just after Hiroshima, and a lot with actually the Japanese recent disaster with the hurricane and tsunami. There was a lot of lessons learned there as well. And things evolve with disasters. It usually just takes a little bit. Nuclear and chemical is usually not in my wheelhouse here at the health department. Mine would be the fallout of the people afterwards. But I can tell you in my profession, every time there's an incident, there's a huge group of people trying to figure out how to make it better. And it's an evolving situation. We are always in a preparedness cycle, learning new ways to handle things and lessons learned. And we do a lot of investigation to old situations to figure out how to deal with future ones.
Sure. Well, it looks like we are getting close to the end of our time here. I'm not seeing any more questions. Any closing comments, Vanessa, for you?
No, it's an honor to come here and talk about this, and my information was on the screen. I'm quite sure you can reach out if anybody has any questions, email me. I'm happy to answer them.
Sure. One last question here. We got, there's a CDC center, I guess, up in Fort Collins, and evidently there was a security breach recently for the workers that they were being infected with the plague. What is the preparedness plan for something like that? I know you kind of discussed a little bit about, some different incidences, but any thoughts on if something like that were to happen?
So on the CDC breach,
Yeah.
I have no idea. Are you talking with the plague itself?
Yeah.
So with plague, yeah, so there's actually a lot of occurrences of different illnesses. The best thing to do is identify and watch. What most people don't realize is there's a whole epidemiology group. They're the group that watches illness like the plague, and they actually watch for occurrences in Colorado, and there's a lot of illnesses that they actually watch, and they know the exact number and where they were. They do the surveillance for the sole purpose of making sure we don't have an outbreak or looking to see if we will. And with the plague and a lot of those highly contagious, there's usually a surveillance. If there is a case, there is usually a lot of investigation to that one case just to prevent it, to figure out what caused it, why it happened, and then they do a lot of mitigation in the beginning. Okay. Epidemiology at the state is huge. There's a lot of watched. Tularemia is being watched. Naturally occurring anthrax is watched. There's a lot of illnesses that have a whole team watching the first case to prevent other cases. And we have here at the health department 3 people. Their whole job is to call people if they had a bout with rabies. They will call anyone around there, family members, figure out where that person went, how they got exposed, who they've been in contact with. It's pretty much a daily operation.
Okay, interesting. All right, well, we're going to wrap it up. Vanessa, thank you very much for your time, and this presentation is very, very thought-provoking and a lot of good information and detail. It looks like I got some prep work to do. So thanks for that extra honeydew list. I like that.
Oh, yeah. You want me to send that to your wife? I gotcha.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.